Hi everyone, this is Nike, and I'm happy to be presenting you guys with the first ever official DnT engineer build for Dungeons and Fractals. So let's get right into it. The September feature patch brought a few buffs to the engineer. However, the most important thing it did for the NG was to nerf Fiery Greatsword. Fiery Greatsword, in combination with the Elementalist trait Weak Spot, meant that in most fights, the boss was usually capped at 25 vulnerability stacks. As stacking vulnerability is the main selling point for the engineer, that made engineers pretty redundant, and they really didn't add anything to the standard meta party. With Fiery Greatsword nerfed, the ability of an engineer to provide ample vuln stacks to enemies has become a valuable resource. In combination with the ability to provide might stacks and stealth, the engineer is in a much better place in the PvE meta. It remains to be seen if this will be enough for speed clear teams to make an engineer part of the record run meta, but for general daily dungeon speedruns, a skilled engineer is an asset to any party, and I would argue that they are even more valuable in Fractals. So without any further ado, let's get into the gear. Alright, for gear in the NG, I recommend for your armor to be full Assassins with Scholar Runes. Assassins is very necessary because unlike other professions, NGs don't have really any utility skills like a Signet that will give them extra precision, and critting for an NG, as we'll get to when we discuss traits, is of the utmost importance. So that's why I recommend full Assassin's armor on an engineer and Scholar Runes for maximum DPS. For weapons, I suggest an Ascended Rifle with Sigil of Night and Sigil of Force. If you don't like Sigil of Night, you can replace that with Sigil of Accuracy or a Slaying Sigil of your choice. It's really up to you. I prefer Night personally, and that's what I recommend you go with. As far as trinkets, I would recommend the Berserker trinkets for that. It's really the most simple. I know there are new Ascended Assassin's trinkets that you can get with dungeon completion, but with these Berserker trinkets and the Assassin's gear here, you actually are at 60% crit chance, which goes up to 88% in a fully buffed party, and one of your traits gives you an additional 10% chance to crit, so that'll put you at 98% crit chance, which is all that you want. So you don't really need the new Assassin's earrings, so that is easy to recommend with the Berserker trinkets. NG gear, really simple. You can bring a shield and pistol for certain instances, such as Lupicus, where the extra block is very useful, or the extra blast finisher of the shield is very useful. But for the most part, you can pretty much gear an NG out with one rifle and be done with it. So that's definitely a helpful thing for the NG, and makes it super simple, and we can move right on to traits. For traits, I recommend a 66002 loadout. In explosives, we take shrapnel. Explosions have a chance to cause bleeding. This means when we use our grenade kit, which shoots at multiple projectiles, each one will have a 15% chance to cause a bleed. This will really, and they're long-lasting bleeds, so this will really stack up pretty well. We'll take explosive powder, increase damage from explosions. This will work well with our grenade kit as well for an additional 10%. Steel-packed powder, explosions cause vulnerability. This means that when we're using the grenade kit, we're going to be stacking a significant amount of vulnerability. And then lastly, we take Grenadier. You throw your grenades farther, and your grenade skills produce an extra grenade, which combos well with everything else that we've talked about so far in this line. Moving on to firearms, the very first minor trait, Sharpshooter, critical hits have a chance to cause bleeds. There are a lot of hits in this build, since most of your attacks hit multiple times, and you'll be critting a lot, so you'll be stacking up a lot of bleeds. I found that just against a stationary target that gives you a lot of time, you can get up to about 20 bleeds with this build, which is pretty substantial. The next, we'll take Precise Strikes at the major trait for the Adept tier. 50% chance on crit to cause vuln for 4 seconds. This is very, very strong, and this trait in combination with the above trait in explosives will allow the engineer to stack up around 14 to 20 vuln on bosses all by themselves. Quite powerful. Target the weak. I mentioned this when discussing gear, but against targets that are below 50% health, you get an additional 10% chance to crit, which will put you at the 98% crit threshold, which is quite good. Rifle mod, an additional 10% damage when using rifle. We will be using rifle in this build as I discussed, so this is a pretty big DPS increase for the 2 rifle skills that we like to use. Target the maimed, an additional 5% damage against bleeding foes. Most foes that we're going to be fighting will be bleeding against this build, so that's a straight 5% damage boost, quite good. And modified ammunition increases damage for each condition on a target 2%. This is going to be generally between 10 and 12%, although depending on who else is in your party and what else they provide, it can be as high as 16%, which is a pretty hefty DPS boost. All the way down in tools, we will use Adrenaline Pump to get some endurance back when we use our tool belt skills. And then when we use our tool belt skills, we create a static discharge that will hit a foe with a static attack. Just adds a little bit of DPS to the build. And all of our tool belt skills are quite useful. So it's a very powerful trait to have. One thing I want to mention about the traits and this loadout, when you're doing open world content or just casual dungeon runs and pugs where you can't count on people to provide you with swiftness, you can trade out static discharge for speedy kits. And when you activate a kit, you'll get your swiftness. And as you'll see, when it wears off, you can swap to another kit and get swiftness back, and so on and so forth, and maintain permanent swiftness. This is really a quality of life upgrade and doesn't really help your DPS the way static discharge does, but I found that when running around open world, not having permanent swiftness is something I can't live with. So I generally always will keep speedy kits on unless I know I'm in a fast dungeon run where people will expect me to be running static discharge. As far as food goes for this build, you want your full complement of dungeon potions, of course, for whatever instance you're running. But the new food from Dry Top, this is the best food that's ever been made for an engineer. 40% condition duration and plus 70 power. This build has a very high chance to crit, so we do appreciate the extra power. Thanks to the Assassin's gear we're using, we're a little bit down on power relative to Berserker, so the power is good. And the 40% condition duration means that we're stacking more Vuln and more bleeds for our party, and doing more damage. This food is, without a doubt, the best food you can be doing on an NG. If you are on a budget, because those are relatively expensive, you can use Koi Cakes for the 40% condition duration, or Rare Veggie Pizzas for the longer lasting version. If your party is at full Vuln, and you don't really need the duration, you can use Spicier Flank Steaks, 80 power, 60 condition damage, or Truffle Steaks, the 100 power, 70 precision, or the rarer version of these. But these are my go-to budget foods for this build. So, one thing I wanted to mention before we move on about traits: if you're new to Engineer, this is a pretty unforgiving build. You don't have a lot of dodges. Your only real way to get endurance back is using your tool belt skills with Adrenaline Pump. One thing I found that might be helpful to a newer player who's just picking up the Engineer is to take 2 out of tools and put 2 into Alchemy. Then you're going to switch Rifle mod up here for Infused Precision. This is going to give you swiftness on crit. Then we go down to Alchemy and we take Invigorating Speed, gain Vigor whenever you gain swiftness. With these 2 traits, you're going to have Perma Swiftness and Perma Vigor while in combat. The Perma Vigor in combat will be much more forgiving for a new person learning NG. I found that the DPS rotation with NG is rather complicated, and while you're learning it, you might be a little bit distracted by your keystrokes and not paying attention to your dodges as much, and it will pay off to have the extra dodges. So this is a trait setup that I would recommend to someone who's brand new to NG or brand new to running full Berserker characters in general. But for the most part, the standard build, like I said, will put the 2 into tool belts and take static discharge, and this will go back to rifle mod. So that's it for traits. The next thing I want to go over is the DPS rotation. I'll talk about that in a second. So DPS rotations. I'm going to warn you guys from the start, nobody except a complete NG master is going to ever be able to maintain perfect engineer rotations in dynamic combat the way other classes that are a little bit more straightforward and require fewer keystrokes are able to do. There's just too many cooldowns to manage mentally, too many button presses, too many keystrokes. The result is that you're going to often fall short of perfection. The upside to that is that even if you are perfect 90% of the time, you're still putting out pretty darn good DPS, and I have noticed that with this, practice makes perfect. So with that said, I'm going to go through the rotation really slowly and then show you an example video of it in action. So you're going to start the fight with your flamethrower kit equipped. That's going to be your standard thing that you're going to be carrying into fights. The very first thing you're going to do when you get to the boss or when the boss goes active is use Grenade Barrage. This will make a spray of a lot of explosives that are going to put a lot of damage and a lot of vuln out there. So that's the best thing you're going to start out. You're going to get 7 stacks of vuln, basically, perhaps more, maybe up to 10 or 11. And that's a pretty great way to start the fight. So then with our flamethrower, we're going to use Napalm. That'll be the first thing. This creates a fire field that is going to apply burning and do a little bit of damage every second for 10 seconds. We'll drop that right on the boss that we're fighting. Second skill in the rotation is Flame Blast. You will fire Flame Blast and immediately detonate it. The detonation hits extremely hard. It's a very powerful skill, and it's a blast finisher, and since we have the fire field down, we're going to get some extra little might for our party, and that'll be generally pretty good. And that, like I said, that skill hits very hard. The next thing you're going to want to do, immediately after you detonate your Flame Blast, switch to Elixir Gun, and we're going to be using Acid Bomb. Acid Bomb is one of the hardest hitting single skills in the game. It will tick 5 times, or 6 times I should say, and each tick does a pretty significant amount of damage. In total, it has a coefficient of 5.1. I don't expect everybody to understand all the background math of the DPS calculation, but the only other skill that comes close to putting out a 5.1 all by itself is the Warrior 100 Blades, so it's in pretty good company. The drawback to Acid Bomb is when you use it, you go flying back, and it'll put you way out of the stack that you're in and can get you into trouble. However, the one plus side to that is you can interrupt the flyback with a weapon swap. So once you use the Acid Bomb, you will immediately weapon swap to interrupt the knockback like so. And it will prevent you from falling too far back. So once you have interrupted it and weapon swapped, you will now be in your rifle set, which will take us to the next 2 skills. Rifle number 3 is Blunderbuss. This is a very hard-hitting skill at point-blank range, which is where we'll be fighting. So you'll Blunderbuss. That'll put a bunch of bleed stacks into a ton of direct damage. The very next thing you're going to want to do is Jump Shot. Jump Shot hits extremely hard. I would say the closest comparison to Jump Shot is a Backstab from a Thief or an Eviscerate from a Warrior. It will hit twice, and so the damage is divided over the 2 hits, and it puts on some vuln stacks. The fact that it hits twice and the damage is divided by 2 hits might lead people to believe it's not that hard hitting of attack, but if you add up both of the hits, you'll see that it hits extremely hard, and it's not uncommon in a DPS group to be coming to close to 30,000 damage with that. Moving on, after you Jump Shot, you immediately want to switch to Grenade Kit, use Freeze Grenade, Shrapnel Grenade, and then continue to auto attack with the grenades. Shrapnel Grenade will come off cooldown, use it again, go back to auto attacking. At this point, Grenade Barrage will come off cooldown. You want to use Grenade Barrage again, Shrapnel Grenade again, and then swap back to Flamethrower. Flame Blast will be back up, And you can go back to Acid Bomb, because that will be just coming off cooldown. You can use Acid Bomb, Weapon Swap to Interrupt, and your rifle skills will be off cooldown. And this is a cycle that you can repeat over and over again. And that is your general DPS rotation. It's rather complicated, and it takes a lot of practice to get used to. But after a couple days of playing Engineer in dungeons and trying to stick to this script, you will find that you get way better at it, and it becomes a much easier rotation to manage, and I think you guys will enjoy it a lot. So that's it for the DPS rotation, and that's really it for the NG guide. The closer you can stay to those rotations, the more important it is. One thing that you want to mention is that these utility skills are ideal, but they're not always the best thing to run for your team. There are times where you simply don't need the Flamethrower kit, and your team can benefit more from Elixir U, because the toss of Elixir U makes a Wall of Reflect, or a Smoke Screen, both of which eat projectiles. If your team is low projectiles, you're going to benefit a lot more from the toss Elixir U than you would from a little bit of extra damage from the Flamethrower. So be sure to keep in mind what your team's facing. Additionally, sometimes you're going to want to swap to Bomb Kit and be able to stealth your party. The extra stealth will be able to allow you to make trash runs. If you don't have a thief, you're going to want to do that. So there's a lot of little tricks that come with an NG, and I can't really go into every last combo and every last thing that you want, but it's worth keeping in mind that what I've outlined is just the standard template, and it's not the end of the equation. You guys are creative, and I have no doubts that you guys will be able to figure out crazy combos to do with an NG or utility uses that are going to benefit your party in all sorts of random circumstances. But for the most part, let this be the standard template and standard DPS rotation that you'll face. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoy. Any questions you have, I'll be happy to ask them in the comments. And I look forward to seeing more NGs out there. Catch you guys later.